Hello, Cindy.
Hi.
So we are chatting. It is 4 p.m. my time and 7 a.m. your time.
Yes, I got up bright and early.
I'm very sorry. Are you a morning person?
I am. Yeah, I
You
get
are?
up early anyway. Yeah. So, and I do this a lot with people from America. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of used to, yeah, in fact, I just booked an interview for 6:30, which is stretching it a little bit, but
Oh my
that's
goodness.
just the way it is.
I guess you have to do that if you want to do these interviews with your American friends.
Yes. It's fun.
Yeah. Okay, well, we are each going to read a segment of our book, and I'm going to have you go first. So if you want to introduce
Okay.
your book and read a little bit of it.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. So my book is called Parenting Forward, How to Raise Children with Justice, Mercy, and Kindness. And it was published a year and a half ago, but, you know, I hope I still remember what's in it. But yeah, so it's called Parenting Forward. And the idea of the book is, you know, I was kind of part of this space online talking about how we are deconstructing our faith. And I just felt like no one was really addressing the angle of, well, what about parenting? You know,
Totally.
What happens if you're deconstructing your faith and you're parenting kids who are like forming their faith for the first time? And how like your baggage, you know, intertwines and impacts the way you raise your kids. And so that's kind of that's my thing. It's the conversation that I hope to occupy. And so this is my book. So I'm going to read a section that's subtitled Belonging Over Conversion. Despite the many good things my childhood religion gave me, I feel crippled with spiritual wounds to this day. After years of wrestling with my deconstruction, I believe what brings me the most pain is the lack of consent I had as a minor to agree to an allegiance to Christianity, especially a version that demands one to be on fire for God. I appreciate the many beautiful aspects of the Christian tradition, but having been converted as a child with the threat of eternal damnation, I began my Christian life under coercion. My natural spirituality was subsumed by fear. Extending spiritual autonomy to children means not abusing our adult power over their vulnerabilities by scaring them into conversion. Instead, we can provide spiritual grounding by inviting our children into a large, open field of spirituality where we can play and experiment with a set of values. This belonging allows them freedom to practice their spirituality in a safe and loving environment. Providing a set of values for a child to live into is markedly different in terms of power dynamics than demanding a child adhere to doctrine. The former compels, while the latter coerces. As parents, our goal isn't to maintain a hierarchical divine order in the home, but to disrupt a world consumed with power, greed, division, and conflict with resistance. We're inviting our children into a family life of developing spiritual habits of power-giving, peacemaking, and hope-lifting, that they might radiate these characteristics wherever they move about in the world. Instead of rules to obey, there are stories to create. Instead of demanding blind obedience, we have civil and equal discourse alongside our children about what kind of people we want to be, both adults and children.
That just resonates deep in my bones. Because that is absolutely how I was raised. I mean, it's funny. I was on a Zoom call with some other kind of, I don't know, progressive Christian friends, whatever you want to call it. And we were talking about these movies that we watched as kids, these Christian movies. And there was this one, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was like about a girl who got in a car accident and like went to hell. And someone pulled it up and we started watching it. And it was pure scare tactics. I mean, it was just a classic movie to make you scared of going to hell and to compel you to save your friends from going to hell. And I feel like that was what my faith was when I was young. Like it wasn't about love or justice or even spirituality. It was about like hell avoidance.
Yeah. And,
right.
And it's like, and there were a lot of good things, you know, we were to be loving and peaceful and all those good parts of Christianity. But it was like, it wasn't, we weren't given internal motivation
Yes.
to do that. It was always
Yes.
external. It was always, if you don't, then this God is always watching over you, and
Oh my
not in a good
gosh.
way. Like God is,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
super harmful.
Super harmful. And I want to come back to this idea of external versus internal. Let me read a section from my book, and then we'll come back to that, because I have many thoughts on this idea of like internal versus external moral compass. Okay. This is from a chapter called Opting In, where I talk briefly about how I want to raise my kids in terms of their own faith. I want my kids to know their relationship with God is about community with a creator that loves them and everyone else. In turn, their primary obligation to that love is to express love to others. We go to church sometimes. Some of my kids attend youth group and some don't. We listen to worship music in the car and sometimes gangster rap. We go to a yearly progressive Christian festival that is full of Bible teaching and pride flags. I run a local chapter of Beer and Hymns where we take over a bar and sing sacred songs in an experience that's both rowdy and irreverent. I let my kids experience a wide swath of expressions of faith. They know that I'm a Jesus fan, and I hope they are too. The expression of faith in my family hinges on showing love to those around us, not adhering to rules that prove we are good enough to earn our salvation. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like that is a place that we've both landed, right? That we want our kids to have an experience of faith that's outside of fear.
Yeah.
That's outside of just this sort of like, if I follow these rules, then I'm a Christian.
Yeah. Well, I talk about child protective policy. So a lot of places have child protective policies where you have to have 2 adults present, maybe some cameras. There's all these policies that we have to protect children, rightfully so, but we don't have spiritual child protection policies. And I think that one of the spiritual child protection policy to honor our kids' inherent spirituality is to expose them to diverse expressions, which is what you talk about. And I think that because no matter who you are as parents, some people are atheists, some people are agnostic, some people are Christians of all different strains. I think it's unjust really to impose that on our kids. I think that ultimately it has to be their decision. And so, but what we can do is we can, give them that exposure, and that will help them know that it doesn't have that they do have a choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Do you have any advice for parents who, maybe are Christian, but they want to expose their children to other faiths, but are unsure of how to do that without or maybe they have concern of like, if I do this, then I'm just saying that I don't believe in my own faith. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I feel like if you are afraid of other religions, I mean, that's xenophobia. And if that is a stumbling block, to use a Christian term, to you in your own faith, then you need to examine your own faith. You need to look at why your version of faith is afraid of other religions. So much of parenting really is parenting yourself, and you having to examine what's unhealthy and uprooting that. And once you get to a place where you're like, yeah, my faith compels me to care for people of other religions and those who don't have religion, right? Like that's, following Jesus means that I love people no matter what, and that I care for them, and I try to find common ground, that I try to coexist in this beautiful, diverse world of ours.
Yeah.
If you can find your peace in that, then the fear is gone from letting your children be exposed to that.
That's really good. So going back to this whole idea of like internal versus external moral compass, one of the things that I have noticed, having grown up in Christian circles, and I went to Bible college, is it felt like for a lot of people, their moral compass was based more in rules than in an understanding of like justice or what's actually right and moral. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there was
And
this meme with like all the racial justice stuff right now that said, I was raised to care more about my spaghetti straps than about
right.
Black Lives Matter.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it was such a good encapsulation of.
Yeah. And then, I feel like then what happens is when you don't actually have an internal moral compass that's based in love and justice and it's just external, then it's really easily shakable, and I think we're seeing that in Christian communities too, where racism is a great example, or even in like political choices, it's like we can follow rules, but the moral standing underneath it, there isn't a lot of foundation.
Well, I think when you're raised to be told what's right and wrong all the time, then you
Yeah.
don't develop the skill to determine it for yourself.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of adults who still rely on the people in authority to tell them what's right and wrong. And then that's really easily manipulated.
Yeah.
And that's what happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I think of so much in raising my own kids is like, I want their morality to be so strong that even if they decided in adulthood, I don't identify as Christian or I don't believe any of this, then that they still have a moral compass, right? That it doesn't like fall apart, which I feel like I've seen with a lot of Christians that I've known is like, if they walk away from the faith, then suddenly they're just like hog wild. Like there's nothing holding together their morality, which
Yeah.
is weird because I think sometimes people conflate morality and faith like they're the same thing, but I think they're not.
No. Yeah, because if you say that, you would have to say atheists have zero morals, and that's
Right.
just not true.
No, not at all.
Well, I'll say a couple things in response to that. First is I do feel like a lot of the people we see going hog wild is going through a phase.
Yes.
And
yes.
that maybe is quite healthy because when you've been suppressed and controlled for so many years, that you want to just experiment. And I think a lot of part of figuring out your own ethics is kind of doing all the things and deciding, this doesn't actually feel very good to treat people this way. And then, so I'll say that. And then the other thing is, oh no, I forgot what the other thing was. Yeah, I think that, I believe, and this may be me being a totally naive optimist, but I believe that people are good at the core. I feel like everyone, I don't really believe people are evil. I think that when there is misbehavior or bad things and evil things that happen in the world, let's just speak to the moment at the time with these cops doing horrendous things to people, like that is evil. But to me, it's like, there's something in the system that's built up historically that creates people that behave that way. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I believe that too. Yeah, absolutely.
And so for me, I'm not very concerned about, we got to make sure our kids, have these right morals. Because it's like, for me, it's more like, let's compel them to live into who they are, which is good.
Yeah.
So
it's so hard though, because I do agree with you that I think it's the systems that perpetuate, violence and racism and all that kind of thing. But like as a mom raising boys, for example, I feel like if I don't do some course correction, the toxic masculinity that we're kind of swimming in, like I feel like they're naturally good, but then they're swimming in an environment that is toxic.
Yes.
And so then that's where I feel like I'm correcting, because it's like, if I was raising them in a vacuum, I would feel like they would be naturally good, but I feel like I'm raising them with, there's just so much. There's like toxic masculinity, and then there's like, we're living in, you're not, but I'm living in this nationalist country, with so much racism. And so then it feels like we have our work cut out for us,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it would be really naive if we didn't address those things. And in fact, it's critical that we address those things and make it visible so that our kids have the opportunity to exercise their agency to resist it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when people are, for example, perpetuate colorblind ideology, which you talk about in your book so beautifully, that's like another, I think when I say I believe people are good, a lot of colorblind people will say that. They're like, oh no, my kids would never be racist. They don't even see color.
Yeah.
Like that's not what I'm talking about. I'm
Right.
talking about having clarity of what's going on in that toxicity
Yeah.
in the culture. But that's the thing. If we make those things visible, I believe in our children's ability and capacity to resist it.
Yeah, I do too.
That's the good that I think I mean when I say
Yeah, I totally agree. And what's interesting is I have found when you make that stuff visible, kids really grasp it, I think, more than a lot of adults. Because to your point, they are naturally good. And when they have had less of this toxic systemic stuff, in their face, I think they're a little bit more pliable to be like, wait, I can see right and wrong. Does that make sense? They haven't built up like the justifications.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I think that's what it is. I think they haven't yet had the time to see the many layers of complexities. I don't know. I'm sure you've watched The Good Place.
Yes.
Yeah. So in The Good Place, they discuss how ethics is so complicated that especially in this day and age, it's almost impossible to keep that scoreboard.
Yeah.
Because, you try to do good in one thing and it turns out you're being offensive to this other thing. And I think that's the part that kids aren't exposed to quite yet. And so they're still able to have that scoreboard. They still can see this is clearly right and this is clearly wrong, which is great. And I think we really need to lean into that clarity for ourselves. At the same time, we of course have to also scaffold that complexity into our children and help them know that this is complicated. We can talk about it as you grow into it.
Yeah. But it's so fascinating to me how my kids at such a young age are able to grasp topics that I think are even difficult for like my parents, things like my daughters are white and they're like, yeah, I know what white privilege is. I totally understand that. I don't need, they're not feeling like someone is taking something away from them or that, it's threatening, or, my boys can say like, yeah, I'm a feminist because without all of the world's noise around these concepts, I think kids are like, oh yeah, I get that. Like they have an internal justice meter.
Well, I think it speaks to the kinds of resources that they have now.
That's true.
I mean, I was just posting a queer children's media resource, and I was like, the kinds of media these kids have is incredible. We never growing up had
never.
And they have Black Panther, and they have just these wonderful.
Well, I walked downstairs the other day and my kids were watching Supergirl, which is just, I don't know, some show I'm not paying attention.
Hero.
Yeah. And I walked down and I'm like, and then there's a lesbian couple on the show. Just no big deal. Nothing to see here. Just a lesbian couple. And I'm like, are they a couple? My kids are like, yeah. And, and I'm like, you don't understand. When I was growing up, like Ellen came out and her show was canceled. Right? Remember that? Like,
yes.
It's just, it is so different now. And Disney Channel has gay characters and.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't know the balance of like, should I just let them, it's wonderful that for them it's no big deal. But then other times I do want to say, you don't understand.
Yes.
This is groundbreaking, I don't know what to do. Sometimes I do speak up. Sometimes I just let them be in this utopia that they're in.
I know, but I've realized like, because my kids aren't growing up in evangelical circles, I remember a point where I was talking to my kids about leaving my previous church, and they were like, well, why'd you leave? And I said, well, they are not affirming, and they had, fired a friend of mine who came out as gay. And I remember my daughter was like, what? Like, she couldn't believe it. Like, it was so out of her paradigm. She was just like, that is so mean. And then she started asking me about other adults that attend the church. Like, does so-and-so think this? Well, what about so-and-so? Because they go there. And it so blew her mind that it was a reminder to me of like, they need to know the backstory too. Like, they also need to know what oppressive forces are still actively in the world, right? Like that, yes, this church that's huge in our community that many of our friends go to is actively not allowing gay or lesbian people to serve, volunteer, or work there. Like, that's still happening.
Yeah, I know. It's so hard.
Yeah.
So heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Also, because it's part of their parents' story. It's just another very simple reason why we do need to tell them.
Yeah.
Like, we had to survive that. You better know about it.
Right? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And just to know, the brave gay and lesbian people who came before them and what they had to overcome in the 80s and 90s, and so much discrimination to get where we are. And we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, you have been such a leader in this progressive space in terms of parenting, because I do feel like it's weird because there's a lot of direction for kind of deconstructing our faith, but I feel like parenting is kind of that last frontier where everyone's like, I don't know, man. Right? Like, because we don't have a model for it. A lot of us don't, have a model for, I don't know, how to instill a different kind of faith in our kids. Like, I'm still struggling with it even.
Yeah, it's a little bit heartbreaking for me.
Yeah.
And I find myself quite frustrated with the progressive faith world for not investing a little bit more in this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly, it's a lot of it is like a fear. I
think you're right.
Afraid. Yeah, they're afraid. It's like, and I think this is not just in faith circles, but in general. People, what we do is we put kids in another world. Like I talk about this metaphor of we have the adult table and we have the kids table. The kids table have their own conversations. We have our adult conversations. And we set up this construction without realizing that our kids we have so much more in common than we have different.
Yeah.
So because we've sort of othered them, we've made them separate from us, we're afraid to talk to them. We feel like we don't know how. There's such high stakes too. I think we're so afraid of messing them up in a serious way, especially those of us who did grow up with childhood wounds.
Right.
Like, I don't want to repeat that. And so there's a lot of fear of that, which is like an opposite side of love.
Yeah.
But it's still a fear. So there's all these different factors that go into this, this obstacle to talking to kids about faith. But honestly, like, they're just people, I just did a podcast interview with an 8-year-old.
Oh, I love that.
And it was, I was a little bit apprehensive about it, but it was just, it takes longer. I'll say that.
Yeah. Little windy roads.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like it takes them longer to speak the deepest part of their hearts. And I don't know why that is. I think because adults were used to performing, and especially those of us who are content creators, whatever, we know how to give our sound bites, and so the podcast goes fast and we're just bam, bam, bam. But kids, they're not thinking about performing. They're just talking. So it took a little bit longer to kind of get at the heart of things. But my point is, doing a podcast interview with a child is not that much different. Yeah. It's also just having a conversation human to human. And so, I would love for more people to not be afraid of talking about faith with your kids and saying, I don't have the answers. It's complicated. Like our kids get all of that.
Totally. Yeah. And one thing I really appreciate about your writing too is, you know, you're coming from a progressive angle, but I feel like sometimes progressive circles can kind of circle around what we're against. You know, we're against injustice or we're against homophobia, which is all so important. But sometimes it seems like we're not sure what we're for, like, right? Like, so in terms of like the faith part, you know, it's like, and I really just appreciate that your writing is really focused on, you know, that relationship with God is still a part of it, right? Like that relationship piece, rather than just, you know, rah, we're fighting against, which is obviously a part of it and something I'm passionate about, but it feels like that is sometimes missing. And that's where the disconnect is with our kids too, that we're not just saying, this is what we don't like. We're saying, this is who we are. This is what our identity is.
Yeah, I think it's a reframing of the same conversation, because a lot of times we deconstruct our faith because we are for something. It's because you believe love is love that you're against homophobia.
Yeah.
And so it's just a reframing of the same thing. And a lot of parents will tell me, I just have no idea what values to give to my kids. I have no idea what kind of Jesus I want to share with my kids. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You do know. Because just think about why you are not accepting what you grew up with.
Yeah.
Dig a little bit deeper into your own faith journey, and you'll find those values are there.
That's good.
And I think when you're faith shifting, confusion is really normal. So I'm not trying to like blame or shame people for feeling confused. But I'm saying that it's there. You know what's true to you that you want to give to your kids. Give yourself that time and the courage to find your own clarity.
I love that. Well, where can people find you online? I'll have your book linked up under our video, but where can people find you on Instagram and Facebook and all that?
So I have like a whole slew of resources. I have my book, and I have my conference, which you can still access online.
Parenting Forward.
And I have a podcast, which we're about to record.
Yes, we are. Yes.
That's called Parenting Forward as well. And I have a Facebook group that a lot of people like called Raising Children Unfundamentalist. So you can find me there.
That's such a great resource. Thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you.